Gentlemen, welcome to this side event of Technology Mechanism, titled Technology's Role in Constructing More Ambitious NDCs. The event built on a joint publication prepared by the TEC and the CTCN, the two bodies of the Technology Mechanism, which was presented in Glasgow last year, and this is a sort of follow-up of a discussion that we had already in Glasgow on the role of NDCs. The aim is to discuss how mainstreaming technology in NDCs can stimulate support for and uptake of climate technologies to achieve Paris Agreement goals. The event is structured in two sessions. We will have a first session where the chair of the TEC and the chair of the CTCN advisory board will overview on the work of the two bodies and present the main findings of this joint publication. And then we will have a panel moderated discussion with four experts that the moderator will present later on, that will elaborate a bit on the various aspects of technology, the relationship between technologies and NDC. But let's give the floor to Daniela Villetti, Senior Director of Programs Coordination of the UNFCCC Secretariat, for opening remarks. Daniela, over to you.
I don't have a button. Okay, that's good to know you. Thanks, Andrea. Good evening to all of you. Big pleasure to share this podium with so many distinguished guests, but at the same time to welcome you to this side event. I think there is no doubt how critical is in this moment in time the role of support to developing countries in implementing the commitments made in their NDCs. Now even more because of the post-Glasgow phase of our process, now fully into implementation, requires really a different level of ambition, both in the commitments in the NDCs, but at the same time in terms of support. And the work of the technology mechanism in its two parts, the TEC and the CTCN, of course, has been very important in both providing policy guidance and then support and assistance in terms of technology. But what is in the NDCs in terms of technology is a demonstration that nothing can be really achieved without the proper use of technology, the uptake of technology in developing country. And therefore, the work of the technology mechanism, the experience to be shared, the lessons learned, and turning this into real action now is even more important. Unfortunately, we know that it's not enough what is in the NDCs at the moment to take us where we need to be. The urgency for scaling up ambition in terms of NDCs is more urgent than before. We are not on the pathway to the 1.5 degrees, unfortunately. And this was, again, underlined in Glasgow. So in this context, whatever is considered to be support, meaning finance, capacity building, and technology, is the essential mean to achieve the potential that is there, and therefore scaling up is even more important now. So referring to this side event of today, and always grateful to our work with the TEC and the CTCN on the climate change secretariat side, definitely the technology role in more ambitious NDCs is critical. The analysis of the technology component, as I said, is really relevant. And therefore, this conversation and building on what has been done already at the time of Glasgow is very, very, very critical. So I'll stop here. Welcome again, and glad to see all of you here, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anne Barr. I'm a member of the Women and Gender constituency and also a member of the CTCN Advisory Board. and I will be extremely happy to moderate this session. Mr. Villetti, thank you very much for your introducing words. As explained, the session will be in two parts. We will first have a presentation on the publication that was jointly published in Glasgow at the COP26, in which I had the pleasure to contribute, by the way, by Mr. Ambrosio Iobanolo, Chair of the TEC, and Omedi Jura, Chair of the CTCN Advisory Board. So, Mr. Ambrosio, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for the floor, and I will start to welcoming our distinguished participants, colleagues, and to welcome again to this technology mechanism event held by the TEC and the CTCN. Also, I would like to make note and congratulate the Women and Gender constituency for their inclusion in the advisory board of the CTCN through a COP decision last year amongst Yongo, whose representative is in the second row, and indigenous people organization. The technology mechanism is one of the few mechanisms that has at that level, at the advisory level, direct participation of stakeholders of the process, and we should take value in how we're innovating in that way, taking into account the non-state organizations into the process. I will also, thank you very much, Rose. Of course, all the appreciation to Rose Webasa, the director of the CTCN, or cherished implementation arm of the technology mechanism, my colleague Moses, chair of the advisory board, and of course, Daniel, we appreciate all the support that the UNFCCC has provided to the technology mechanism of the UNFCCC. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And only missing the hard work of the Secretariat, because without them, most of the events, a big part of the work could not be completed. After saying that, I would like to remark that, unlike in the COPs, where events like this focus in sharing activities and performance of the TEC and the CTCN, today we will focus on a topic that is dear to both parties, namely technology role in constructing a more ambitious NDC. So, next slide, please. Thank you very much. Before we dwell into the topic, I would like to briefly outline how the TEC and CTCN have worked together so far. The TEC and CTCN have continued their collaboration to enhance coherence and synergy in the work of the technology mechanism through several ways across the years, through joint sessions and joint events, for example, like regional teams or the technology mechanism side events, participation at each other's event, for example, the TEC and the NDE regional forums, and the CTCN and the TEC special event on innovation and climate change, hosting in collaboration with the GCF and the GEF thematic dialogue on incubators and accelerators, use of the technical assistance of the CTCN as a basis for the TEC analysis, for example, on TNAs, engaging participation of NDs through service on the endogenous technology publication, and use of the TEC products as a reference in the preparation or implementation of technical assistance, along with jointly designing the monitoring and evaluation system and the communication and outreach. And this year, for the first time under a COP mandate, we are exploring a joint program of work between the two bodies. So the TEC is working in its next 5-year program of work. The CTCN is working also in that program of work. And jointly, we're holding together planning for a 5-year joint program of work in what will be probably one of the most important 5 years for climate change, because it's the years where we must get to the tipping point where the emissions should start to decrease. All this collaboration have enabled the two bodies to complement each other's roles as policy and implementation arms and maximize the impact of the technology mechanism. Next slide, please. This first joint publication that you see on the screen was launched at COP26 in Glasgow. In 2021, the TEC and the CTCN worked together on 2 activities, the technology and NDC, this publication, and technology and gender. At COP20C, we launched this first joint publication on technology mechanism and technology and NDC. This publication focuses on stimulating technology uptake to support countries in implementing NDCs. It analyzed technology issues related to NDC based on revised NDCs and findings from TEC and CTCN work related to NDCs, and identify success stories and lessons learned on the uptake of technologies based on the results of technical assistance. One of the innovation, and I know this because I was the ND, I'm also the ND in my country, we were requested about a TA that was finalized several years ago. So this is an innovation in terms of creating into the countries the need to report back what are the results of the TAs, and that was one of the experience fitted into this publication that Mehdi will explain in a few slides later. Why technologies and NDCs? And why the TEC and the CTCN chose this topic? Well, of course, we're part of the technology arm of the UNFCCC. 2020 was a critical milestone as countries ready to prepare new updated NDC and communicate this to a UNFCCC, responding to the decision 1 CP21 of, as you might note, the adoption of the Paris Agreement. It also an opportunity to better understand how elements of technology is reflected in the first sets of NDC and how challenge and successes in implementing adaptation and mitigation technology priorities. Next slide, please. This chart illustrates different aspects of technology reflected in the NDCs submitted as of 31 of December 2020, as we started doing the work in early 2021. I will go through some elements. For example, the majority of parties mention technology in the revised NDC. However, the structure and level of detail of the information provided on technology aspects varies significantly. Technology needs expressed in revised NDC range from generic needs for support for technology to needs for specific technology sectors and type of technologies, such as agriculture, energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate observation, and early warning systems. Technology innovation and R&D are mentioned by some of the parties also in their NDC. Further, only a few parties include information in their NDCs on their technology challenges. As you might know, under the enhanced transparency framework, it will be required to include the needs, finance, technological, and capacity needs of countries in their reports. It's important to take into account as we move forward the implementation of the Paris Agreement. However, existing reference confirm common challenges identified in the previous work of the TEC and the CTCN, including on financing, enabling environments, and stakeholder engagement and coordination. With this, I would like to hand over the floor to the excellent chair of the IB of the CTCN Advisory Board to present the key findings of the publication. Mr. Mehdi, you have the floor.
It's okay. Thank you very much, Ambrosio. And Ambrosio has made my work very easy because he has already introduced the people in the room. I also want to congratulate them, and particularly the women constituency, for the good work that they did and for being in the advisory board as well, the youth as well as the indigenous people. That is great. And I can also see my vice chair of the advisory board right here. Kenya and the US are co-chairing. Erin is my vice chair here. Welcome. And of course, we have several advisory board members in here as well as tech members. Thank you very much for being around. I will go through the success stories, and that is in the next slide, as you can see. Only a few of them, of course. You can see here a detailed list of the selected cases where the uptake of the technology has directly supported the implementation of NDCs. It's not too early to talk about implementation of NDCs when it comes to CTCN and the tech. The selection of the success stories was guided by diverse and balanced kind of consideration. We looked at geographic regions, the LDCs, the seeds, and also adaptation and mitigation focused technologies, and also cross-cutting issues such as innovation and gender. And they also included case studies from CTCN technical assistance projects. Let's look at the next slide. There are key findings from the publication. In terms of these key findings, we noted the following. The level of detail of the information on technology needs provided by developing country parties in their revised NDCs varied significantly. Furthermore, there needs to be strong linkages between the policy and implementation in order to have an effective uptake of the climate technologies. Indeed, policies need to guide the implementation just as much as they need to be guided by the implementation realities. The findings also highlight that stakeholders play a crucial role in the planning of the technology policies, or strategies and their implementation, and technology solutions resulting from an inclusive process are more likely to be taken up. Something else is we also see from the success stories presented that there are a variety of examples where the uptake of technologies have directly supported the implementation of NDCs, for example, in specific countries like Cambodia. The uptake of electric motorcycles is directly contributing to Cambodia's NDC mitigation target of reducing transport sector emissions. The case studies presented also show that the innovative policies and business models and gender-responsive approaches, amongst others, can help overcome the technical, financial, institutional, and social challenges that arise in taking up technologies. And finally, we note that the local champions who can showcase the successful uptake of technologies can play an important role in securing the support needed for scaling up. We have some key recommendations as well, and that is in the next slide. In terms of recommendations, the publication highlights that in order to stimulate the uptake of technologies in support of NDC implementation, the Tech and CTCN could, for example, develop sectoral technology roadmaps that are in line with NDC targets. Also, continue to update the joint publication to reflect the latest development and trends regarding the role of technology in NDC's implementation. The publication also provided recommendations for parties, and while I will not go through all of them, I can highlight a few of them. First of all, parties can foster inclusive, participatory, and equitable processes and approaches to facilitate the active participation of all stakeholders. Also, parties can undertake actions to enhance the enabling environments and capacities for the uptake of technologies. And those enabling environments can be fostered through putting in place the enabling legal and regulatory environment, through enhancing the capacities of technology stakeholders, and also through promoting favorable market conditions for prioritized technologies. And finally, to expand on one last recommendation, which is that parties can demonstrate success stories that highlight the economic, social, and environmental benefits that have been achieved through the uptake of environmentally sound technologies in order to leverage a broader support for replication and upscaling. So moving forward, should be my last slide. Based on the success collaboration between the TEC and the CTCN, on this first joint publication, as well as CMA guideline on this matter, the TEC and the CTCN have agreed to continue their joint work on technology and NDCs in 2022-2023. In particular, they will focus on the implementation of some of the recommendations made in the publication, which include: 1, updating the joint publication with information from updated NDCs not considered in the initial joint publication, and continuing to share new success stories and lessons learned. Also, TEC and CTCN will work on identifying possible joint work on sectoral technology roadmaps and their implementation to stimulate the uptake of technologies in support of NDC implementation. And finally, the TEC and CTCN will continue their efforts to disseminate information and raise awareness of the findings of this joint publication, as several countries are in the process of updating their NDCs as well. So with these colleagues and with the presentation already done by my colleague Ambrosio, I want to now hand over back to the moderator, Anne Barr. Thank you very much.
Merci. Thank you very much, Mr. Omedi. And we can give a big round of applause. I want to thank both chairs for the very insightful presentation of the outcomes of this publication, and encourage you to read it in details and to spread it around you. And I'm very happy also as a member of the CTCN Advisory Board that we continue to work on this publication. We now are going to pass on to a second round of speakers and distinguished panelists, which I am going to call to this table. So thank you again for the first round of panelists. And we now are welcoming Mr. Ambuj Saga, Professor of Policy Studies and IPCC co-author. You are professor in the Indian Institute of Technology. Please come to the table. Thank you. We have also the honor to welcome Mrs. Estefania Ardila, Senior Country Engagement Specialist, actually Country Engagement Vice Director of the NDC Partnership. If you would like to come and sit at this table. I hope we will have enough room for everybody. Mr. Kutsai Zinzano, in the Ministry of Environment, of Climate, Tourism and Hospitality. You're Director of the Climate Department, and Mr. Lennox Alexander Gralden of the Ministry of Sustainable Development, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management of Belize. Please take seats. Do we have enough seats for everybody?
I think so. Yeah. One can take.
Let me first thank you, all panelists, for having taken the time to come and share your insightful views about this publication and about the role of technology in constructing more ambitious NDCs, which we urgently need today. I will start with a first round of questions. And we will look first at the overview of the trends and lessons learned that are generated from the current implementation of NDCs. And as we want to be informed by science, I will start with Mr. Professor Ambuj Sagar. Based on the findings of the very latest IPCC assessment report, and there is a chapter on innovation and technology, development and transfer. For you, what actions should countries undertake to strengthen the role of innovation and technological change in achieving the objectives of their NDCs? And how can also countries integrate the finding of other chapters of the IPCC, specifically on helping communities to build more climate-resilient development? Mr. Sagar, you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here and for this side event. I think it's a very important conversation, and it's a pleasure to be part of this. In fact, I think the title of the session really says it all. The fact that we have to think about increasing the ambition in the NDCs, and the fact that technology has a really key role to play in this. And that actually was very much the central message of the chapter, the IPCC Working Group 3 chapter on technology and innovation is, I think if I was to say, what's the most key message that came out of that is really it's the power of technology. It's that technology can be has played a very key role in enabling both climate action and sustainable development, and also has potential to do so more. But as you said, I think science has also a role to play in this, in helping us understand how to harness the power of technology. Before I get to the details on that, I think in reflecting on the title, which is the role of technology in constructing more ambitious NDCs, to my mind, there are three ways to think about how one can increase the ambition in NDCs. The first one is, of course, a more effective use of technology to help achieve the existing NDCs. As I say, nothing succeeds like success. So it's really important, if you're thinking about the future, to make sure that we are helping use technology as effectively as possible to achieve the existing NDCs. Second, again, something that our chapter reflected on is the relationship between climate action and sustainable development. And the more we can enhance the synergies between how the NDCs are implemented and developmental aspirations of countries, I think the more likely we are to get buy-in for strengthening of the NDCs. And the third one, of course, is to have a good understanding of what future opportunities are there that technology offers, which then can effectively be integrated into future NDCs. So how does the IPCC Chapter 16 on technology, Working Group 3, Chapter 16, help us think this through? Fundamentally, what's happened maybe in the last 30 years is we have a much more sophisticated understanding of the processes underlying technological change, and therefore also a better understanding of how to shepherd and facilitate this technological change in order to be able to get where we want to go much more effectively and much more even efficiently, I would say. And the chapter talks about the fact that while inputs are important and have always been an important way to understand how we're investing and doing on technology and innovation, we now understand that technological change and innovation is a systemic process. And when I say systemic process, and I think some of it was already kind of highlighted in the previous presentations, that it involves a set of different actors who are interacting with each other in order to achieve specific goals, and they are guided by policies and institutions. So it's really the combination of all three that is the key to success. And therefore, as we understand the systemic nature of innovation, we can understand what gaps may lie in innovation systems within countries, what actors are strong, which actors are weak, and therefore which actors may need to be strengthened. How do you think about interactions between the actors? Very often, for example, in many countries, the interaction between various actors, I mean, the classic two actors being academia and industry, are not very strong, and so one can think about how to strengthen those. I'm just giving you some examples of the way, when one starts taking this systemic approach to innovation and technological change, one is able to engage much more systematically and strategically in guiding this change. I'm not going to go into greater detail here because I think it'll be good to have a discussion, but I'm happy to come back later. But I think this has strong implications both for what one can do domestically in terms of building capacity, and it gives us guidance as to what kind of capacity one needs to build domestically, but also what might be the roles of international cooperation in order to facilitate technological change to achieve the NDCs. And as I said, the better we do now, the more likely we are to be able to think about more ambitious NDCs. I'll stop with that here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We would have a lot more questions, but we have a second round of questions, so I'm sure we will have the opportunity to come back to more that you want to say. Now, let me turn to Mrs. Stefania Ardila. The NDC partnerships contributes very much into strengthening countries in building the NDCs. From your perspective and experience on the ground, supporting those countries to develop and implement their NDCs, what are some of the trends that you have observed, and how do you relate to the outcomes and the findings, the key findings of the publication that have been just presented? Is there a match between what is planned under the NDC for technology, development and transfer, and what is really implemented? What are also the main constraints on the implementation of the NDCs? And how existing vulnerabilities and inequalities play a role?
Thank you very much, Anna. That's a huge question, so I'll try to tackle it as best as possible. So first of all, I'd like to clarify what the NDC partnership is and does, so I can start building off that. NDC partnership is a coalition of multiple partners, including the UN agencies. We collaborate deeply with CTCN, for example, as one of our members. And really what we want to do is to identify the needs for support, the priorities that the countries have in terms of NDC implementation, in terms of raising ambition, in terms of developing long-term low emissions development strategies and bringing those needs together with the support opportunities that are out there by the institutional members of the NDC partnership and the development partners, or the donors that provide the funding. So we are a central unit that does a bit of a matchmaking exercise between the needs and the support available. And in that sense, I'd like to start by saying that certainly what we saw with this previous round of NDCs is that countries, compared to what we saw in the past with the first package of NDCs, that countries really started understanding a bit more and unpacking what the needs for NDC preparation, implementation, ambition raising are at a much greater level of detail. And that, of course, includes technology. So there was a huge leap between those plans, those identification of needs in this set of, let's say, policy documents that are the NDCs, and this, of course, was achieved through the support of many of the members that participated in the flagship program that we have had for NDC enhancement in the previous round, which was the Climate Action Enhancement Package. And there, this has been a key point, and the work that we have been doing with countries around the NDCs is also on planning. So you have the NDCs there, you have these targets, you have these commitments there, and we've worked with 40+ countries in developing NDC roadmaps, building off those NDCs and trying to really bring to the level of detail of outputs where you want to go, who needs to be involved, what support is needed for each of the areas of the NDC. So through those instruments, we have been able to see much more flesh, much more detail, much more understanding, and also much more whole of government and whole of society engagement around what it really means to have NDCs that are implementable, applicable, doable. So altogether, we have received 93 technology implementation requests from our country members. At least 25 countries have submitted us and are implementing together with partners needs and actions that are related directly with technology. Some countries, such as Jamaica, for example, actually with support from CTCN, Nepal, Uganda, have access support by partnership members to develop detailed studies to really go take a deeper dive and understand what the technology's needs are and draw linkages to their NDCs. So I think this has been, and this NDC cycle has been a great step, and the work that countries are doing, building of those NDCs now, has been really important and an improvement in terms of really understanding and mainstreaming what the needs for technology are. In terms of the matching and whether the things that have been implemented match what's the aspiration, there is evidence by the releases of the IPCC that the ambition seems to be slowly getting there. Still, we are still off, but there is also a huge implementation gap. So we do not have a report as NDC partnership to say, okay, these are the plans and we have not really seen implementation in this and this action at a very detailed level, but globally, there is a huge implementation gap. And of course, this has to do with the level of technology adoption, deployment, and so on. So there's certainly a key role for increasing action on that front in the years to come, and that needs to happen very fast. Nevertheless, an interesting thing and finding that we have seen from the countries is that there has been growing interest from the perspective of the support that we are seeing that is being requested from them, from the members, on really strengthening the enabling environments for greater investment, for greener investments, and for enabling technologies to flow and to be deployed at scale in countries. And that is something that we see very positively. And I'd like to refer specifically to the case of one of the initiatives that we had with the NDC partnership, which is the Economic Advisors Initiative. So we've worked with 35 countries on green recovery and thinking about the measures that can be put in place for countries to get out of the crisis and the very difficult situation triggered by the pandemic. So through this program, mainly run with ministries of finance, ministries of planning, We've seen strategies being developed, recommendations on fiscal stimulus policies, incentives as well, financing strategies for the NDCs, even funding, financing vehicles and mechanisms that really means that NDCs are starting to be something more than just the standalone documents that are out there, belong maybe to one ministry, but really starting being taken seriously by ministries of planning, ministries of finance, and mainstreamed into investment decisions. So this is something that we are seeing as a trend. 34 countries with 35 countries in the Economic Advisors Initiative, and we are working with 40 plus countries through embedded finance advisors that are really focusing on mainstreaming climate budgeting, developing green taxonomies and implementing them with the countries, working with the finance sector, engaging the private sector. So this really is not tagged under technology, but it's part of those enabling conditions that need to be there for the technology change and for innovation to happen. So this is something that we have seen in terms of the trends. So I'll perhaps just stop there, the benefit of time, and give the floor to other participants.
Thank you very much. This is fascinating indeed to see how we have here some trends and transformations happening on the ground, and I think that gives us a perfect transition to go to some very concrete examples. First, let me see in which order we said. Yes, we'll go first with Zimbabwe. And Mr. Kudai Ndindano, you are going to present to us a recently conducted technical assistance project that was conducted with the support of the CTCN to develop a roadmap on the circular economy in the water sector, in the waste sector, sorry. How does this action relate to Zimbabwe's NDC, and how has it helped its implementation? How have non-state actors also in different levels been involved in this roadmap and in your circular economy policy?
Okay. Thank you so much, Moderator, and good evening, everyone. I will try and talk to the question regarding the development of a circular economy roadmap targeting the waste sector for Zimbabwe, which I think we concluded, we just concluded, but then by the time we submitted our revised NDC, we had made significant progress in terms of the key elements of the roadmap. But then I think in terms of its contribution to in relation to the NDCs, we found that in our initial NDC, we didn't have much data, we didn't have much information. So we just tried to look at the key emitting sector, which was the NH sector, where we submitted emissions reduction targets from the NH sector only. But as we went on to the NDC revision stage, and also this ongoing technical assistance in terms of developing a circular economy roadmap for the country, we then realized that there's quite a lot in terms of the NH, that the waste that is generated, and quite a lot of potential, because we then realized that when it comes to plastic and paper, for example, we had already some initiatives for recycling and off-takers. But then when it comes now to the solid waste, which is also quite significant, there wasn't much activity in terms of its recycling and use. And also through other further studies as part of that assessment, as well as stakeholder engagement, like you mentioned, from the local authorities, also experts in the sector, we then realized that there's also quite a significant potential in terms of waste to energy initiatives and composting. So through this now, we have actually included the elements of waste management in our revised NDC as we submitted last year, where we now have almost 20% of our of our contribution for emissions reduction is informed by that work where we did the analysis. And also this tied in very well because the revised NDC now actually came up with a 7% improvement in terms of the level of emission from 2015 target of 33%. Now it rose up to 40%, and also included an adaptation component. So from that, as part of the roadmap that was developed, it would then say we're going to have composting, we're going to have waste to energy. So you're looking at your biogas, then the waste that comes out of the biogas plant, you can actually still compost it. Then you use it maybe in climate smart agriculture practices, where we, as part of the adaptation component for our NDC, we actually have issues of climate smart agriculture. So it's really linked now. It's playing a role in terms of both the mitigation and adaptation aspect of waste. So this has really informed quite a lot in terms of this work. And also we have also had other technical assistance projects thanks to CTCN also in terms of even e-mobility and policy framework and roadmap, just trying to assess, see what percentage is as part of that. But what we have learned also, it's as you engage, as you do the roadmap and as part of the consultation processes, you start to demystify also some of these thoughts or perceptions that people would have, like, with this work, is it sustainable? But then, because as part of the consultation, perhaps you're going to start with a technical presentation, perhaps from an expert that will be involved in the project. So people start believing that this is doable, and you actually start having some of the beneficiaries actually taking their own initiative through involvement. Then they want to try it at home. So you see it's already feeding into the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we see a great level of appropriation of the actions that have been conducted. And when we'll come back on our second round of questions, I will be really interested to see how the population of Zimbabwe is being integrated, involved into these development. Let me turn now to Mr. Lennox Alexander Gladden. And you are going to give us an example of your country in Belize. In Belize, the updated NDC includes an array of adaptation actions in key sectors such as coastal zone and marine resources, also agriculture, fisheries, and aquaculture, human health, tourism, forestry, biodiversity. It is very, very large and holistic. How important is Belize's updated NDC in driving real technological changes in all these sectors? And how have existing vulnerabilities in Belize also been taken into account in developing your roadmap?
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And of course, I'd like to start off by, in their absence, thank both Ramiro and Maria from the CTCN. They have really been the driving force as it relates to the technical assistance from the institution. They have helped us to reach this milestone, which will now enable me to share our experience, and of course, taking a page from Mr. Omedian in the importance of inclusiveness. Belize as a country, we decided not to go through this process alone. We appreciate very much so the support by the NDC partnership and their network of partners. Why this was important, and the moderator mentioned the slew of activities, the slew of sectors that we've included in our NDC, but that is only equivalent to the time it took for us to actually update our NDC. It took some time because we choose to take a co-creative approach towards development and inclusion of not only the updated NDC, but the inclusion of the various technologies. The process, okay, the process, I think this is
Just not too close to
yeah,
the mic.
yeah. The process itself, while tedious, was quite rewarding, because we realize as a country, and I think it's for most developing countries, there is a issue as it relates to the absorptive capacity and the uptake of technologies. Our approach, not only as an institution responsible for all climate change-related activities within the country, is to foster that level of engagement, and foster that level of engagement because especially this more robust, updated in NDC, saw the participation of both local and indigenous communities. This was important for us because they bring as well a wealth of knowledge when it comes to indigenous technology, right? Certain things that we as technocrats would have taken for granted was also included in the formulation of our updated NDC. And by doing this whole of society approach towards the formulation, it afforded us that opportunity for them to not only assist with the formulation, but it was more ownership on their part, because they could have seen where their suggestion was actually placed within within our NDC, and that will help us when it comes to a full-fledged implementation. And we realize that as in this instance, as state actors, we cannot implement it all, we cannot monitor it all. So it just goes back to our approach towards the sensitization, and taking this approach, it will now enable us to be more efficient in the implementation of the technologies actually captured within the country's NDC. The NDC in itself is somewhat granular. So it takes into consideration some specific activities, and specific activities meaning it actually highlights some of the technologies that can help us engaging within our adaptive measures to combat some of the impacts that we are already facing as a country. And also, having said this, there are two specific technical assistance that we are receiving, which is going to help us to springboard and help to develop a level of not only sustainability but resiliency within the country. One, of course, speaks to what my colleague shared earlier, the e-mobility policy framework. We're all enthused about electric vehicles. However, we do not want to take for granted that while it is beneficial on one end, when we have to dispose of the batteries, how is that going to work out? So that is something that we flagged earlier on. And as a country that is considered a heavy forested nation, a heavy forested country, we have never truly quantified our groundwater resources. So the second technical assistance that is going to be provided by the CTCN sees the implementation and establishment of a groundwater monitoring system. Of course, both these initiatives have already been captured within our updated NDC, and it also has a costing, because it's one thing, we all understand the conditionality of our NDCs, but at least we, through this mechanism and through the support, not only of the CTCN, but also of the NDC partnership, we've, as a country, we'll be able to fill that gap, a gap that will bring us to a path that sees the country being more water secure, and not take for granted that although we only have 2 seasons, the wet and the dry season, that water is going to be there in perpetuity. So this is a support and the approach that has enabled us to have a more inclusive array of ideas when it comes to inserting technological approaches, the introduction of technology, and some of the methodologies that will get us to our target within our updated NDC. Thanks, and that's my intervention at this point.
Thank you very much. Also very interested to see how this bottom-up approach has informed you on your way to developing this NDC. Now, I had planned to go back to our technology tech chair, for questions, as we are a bit tight on this table, maybe you can take a microphone. So after this first round of experience sharing and expertise sharing, from your perspective, how is the NDC as a guiding document used in the policy process to accelerate technology development, appropriation, and diffusion? And what is the role of the government? How do countries approach this in terms of collaboration? And how is the stakeholder involvement also?
Thank you very much for giving me a floor again, Madam Co-Facilitator. More than a perspective, I believe this will be experience based, of course, in the Chilean experience. And this is important to understand because different countries probably don't do everything the same way. So you must understand that it will be limited, maybe replicable, but it's a single country experience. Regarding that, in this case, was a iterative relationship. Why? Because before the NDCs in 2020, we have the INDCs in 2015. And in that NDC, if you look at the technology component, it was, we'll say, nimble, small, one paragraph, and that was it. And that was the same for all the means of implementation. But since we put that in the INDC, it became a plan. And when it became a plan, inside the government at least, if you have good institution, you will have to go through and comply with the plan. And that means the next time when we started updating our next NDC, we're taking into account everything we learned when implementing the small technology component of our NDC. At that time, that component was to do a technology strategy on climate change. And actually was small. It sounds big, but it was not big, was small. We're starting to learn how to do a strategy on climate change on technology. And then for this NDC, now we have a much bigger NDC in all aspects that reflects the learnings on that beginning a small process. So now we have, for example, the TNAs not only became part of the NDC as part of that, but at the same time, we started developing other instruments and institutions. So we developed the long-term strategy. At the same time, we were discussing the NDC and we were discussing the climate strategy. And then if you go into the long-term strategy, actually, you're going to find a lot of goals that relate directly to technology. For one example, we want to include now in our national policies, circular economy applied to textiles. So that's new in regard to a lot that we have a lot for several products that the producers have to secure the collection of the residues, and that's part, and that what you mentioning, the circular economy part of our NDC, known as the integration part, because we recognize that some things are not just adaptation and integration, have, of course, this technology-related component. So the way technology facilitates implementation gives you programming, and giving you programming as government means other people in the government must follow it and must help you. On the private sector level, and this is important too, it gives strong signals. For example, the signals for decarbonization. So the private sector starts to prepare for that, start to enter conversations, and this case was a voluntary conversation, was not a law, a voluntary conversation between the private sector with the government, and they agreed to start closing some of the coal-based plants in 2025 and within a chronogram. So that's another way the NDC helps to implement, to increase ambition and to implement technologies. And the last part that is not just, not the last part, it's not just about the private sector and the government. The rest of the society also see the signals and this movement and the media around what's being done. So you create awareness. And by creating awareness, people start to change behaviors. At the same time that this was discussed, we approved the law against plastic straws, single-use plastic bags, and a range of law with huge support inside the civil society that actually talk to the behavioral change in the civil society in the context of all these changes that were happening and all the media that you have because you were working on the NDC and the implementation, they start to gather more interest. The final part this is about the ambition. Because I'm talking about implementation, yes, it helps a lot to include in your NDC the technology aspect, not only the technology aspect, of course, to help the implementation of technology in complex with ambition, but also technology gives you the world of what is possible. If you know what technologies you can use, how much they can mitigate, how much they can help you to adapt, then your NDC will become more complex and more ambitious. So if you know what's the cost and the mitigation, because you know the technologies and you know you can implement it, you will have an NDC that's much more ambitious than one that you will do without knowing that. So that's the two ways, one in the implementation at the whole country level, government, private sector, and civil society, but also in giving you the idea of the world, what is possible in your world, and what level of ambition you can realistically realize. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. I think we hear here that we are learning a lot by doing, but for our safe future, we need to learn much more, I think, and I will turn again to science and to Mr. Sagar as an IPCC co-author. The IPCC recently has told us a lot about the importance of engagement of local communities. We've heard here also that indigenous knowledge informs also technology development. And as a member of the Women and Gender constituency, I cannot prevent myself from also mentioning that the IPCC report has a very long chapter of learnings on how gender responsiveness can really transform the way we do technology development. How do you see your main recommendations? And I will ask our panelists to be a bit shorter this time, as we have, we want to give room for the audience also to ask questions. But what would be your recommendations, taking into consideration this and what has been said, the importance of this bottom-up participatory approach, but also the findings of the IPCC 6 report on gender responsiveness and its importance. So as regard to technology development, of course.
Thank you for that question. It's an interesting question. I would actually say that, and I think I'll pick up on what maybe Lennox had mentioned about a kind of a, I think that he phrased, let me just kind of pick up the phrase that I noted. I think he talked about the whole of society approach.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that's a really key phrase. And going back to your question, Anne, about gender inclusivity. To me, actually, the success of NDCs, and when I say success, I mean because it's a kind of a iterative process, and the only way it succeeds is if people in society feel that they're benefiting from all these actions and all these investments. That's where this whole of society and inclusive approach becomes particularly important. You know, the key question to me, I think there's been a lot of talk on implementation. But the key question for me goes even a little bit upstream of implementation, right? Implementation is how do you get somewhere? But I think the bigger question is where do you want to go? And that's really a societal question. Mm-hmm. That's not a technocratic question, right? And so that's where I think the questions of inclusivity become very important. Having said that, I think it's not an either or. I think one has to have both engagement of all communities in understanding what is a desirable direction to go for that particular community and that society. But then science has a role to play in helping us understand how to get there better. And I do want to emphasize on that last part because I think as we are listening to experience of different countries, I think we're seeing different pathways, different capabilities, different contexts, and therefore this question really becomes a question of nuance. I wanted to put up or mention a quote by Tolstoy that I really like, that I want to kind of use that as a way to think about technology. It's a quote by Tolstoy that says, "All happy families are alike, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." I don't want to make this about happiness and happiness, but if I replace happiness by success at using technology, I think one can say all countries that are good at using technologies are alike. But countries that actually are not as good at using technology have gaps in their own way. And I think what we have to really focus is making sure, even as we take an inclusive approach within each country, we are able to take the pathway that actually suits that country, its context and its aspirations, and in doing so actually fill the gaps and capabilities that are in that country. So I think I'm going to just emphasize that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambuj. I think we want to go back now to the national experiences and the distinguished representatives of both countries that we have invited here to give us your insights on the way forward now. We know that we need much more ambition, we need much more action, and we need to look at how we can leverage technology for that in a way also that is going to take everybody on board. So for you, how do you see technology roadmaps serving as effective tools to enable technological changes and contributing to the achievement of the Paris Agreement goals? So what elements could be better done? Where are the gaps? Where do you see the biggest needs and the way forward? I'll give 2 minutes to each of you, 2 or 3 minutes to each of you, please.
All right, thank you. And I think also linking it up to the first presentation, the joint presentation, I think we do realize that for us to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, I think we need to have some transformative interventions, or we bring all these technologies. So I think, to me, I would think the very first maybe stage as countries, where possible, is perhaps you need to conduct your technology needs assessment, or if you have done it previously, perhaps you need to check whether it's still relevant or it needs an update. I can give an example of my country. I think the one that we have is a 2004 technology needs assessment, thereabout. That's almost 20 years ago, and over the passage of time, so many things have changed, and also we have commitments, and there have also been new innovations. So you need to look at that, because when these were done, that was before the NDCs, the low emission development strategies, and the national adaptation plans that we are developing or at various stages of implementation. Once you do the assessment, then you do your roadmap. Then also, if you have a plan of implementing it, at times it's much easier now, because as you do the assessment, the needs assessment, at every stage there's some consultation involved and some explanation why you think this is relevant to the country or to the Paris Agreement. So there's buy-in already that it also finds its way perhaps into the other policies and strategies. Then if you're going to extract it there from a sector policy or strategy, then you incorporate it into maybe the next generation NDC that you're going to produce as a country. There's that ownership and also reference to national processes and documents. So this will also influence in terms of the support towards this implementation at national level. So this is where we are. But also what we then see as an opportunity, perhaps because of the gaps in terms of technology, perhaps there's other opportunities in terms of research and innovation processes, just to try and have all these, even adaptive research, where some technology has worked in another part of the world, you want to take it to a certain area, then you test it to see whether it's as effective as it is. Then also but then what is lacking now in terms of the major gaps are perhaps the investment in some of the technologies. I will again go back to our national revised NDC, where even, for example, we know that with mass public transportation, you actually reduce emissions from vehicle use. But then now, the other way around would be let's promote mass public transportation. And as part of the e-mobility framework that we're looking at, then you look at your infrastructure, then you see perhaps you need to overhaul the system. So that financing gap, that's the one that remains. So we, although we included it, but then the contribution to the overall target was a bit conservative, assuming that this cycle is largely on perhaps some pilots, developing the necessary infrastructure. Then in the next generation NDC, you actually increase the contribution, because by then perhaps you'll be having the basic infrastructure to get started. So that's where we are. Then also enhancing issues of circular economy, because waste, and at times there's a lot that can actually be saved in terms of efficiency, in terms of emissions that are generated. Then also the issues of maybe green buildings, because from one of the technical assistances that we got, it was largely on energy and water use efficiency in the private sector firms, largely, where we realized that there's a lot of energy inefficiency. So just by going that route, and over time, people now realize that there's a lot of benefit when you just have energy and water efficiency economically and also environmentally. So through this, we're also getting another technical assistance to try and come up with maybe green building standards, which we hope by the time we get to the next revision, this will be done and adequate awareness, and we expect them also to play a main role in the next NDC that we shall be submitting. I think I'll end here and allow my colleague. Thank you.
Yes.
Just a quick response. I prefer to field questions, if any, at the end of the session. As it relates to when you look at some of the gaps and some of the lessons learned throughout this process, over the past, I would say 6 to 8 months, and why it is key to maintain that level of collaboration with all stakeholders. Over the past 6 to 8 months, we've drafted a climate finance strategy. We've updated the NDC. We've drafted the LEDs, and we're updating our policy. We're trying to finalize our climate. It's a lot for even myself. So how would you think that the stakeholders, they're going to stomach all of this? So sensitization, and you have to maintain that level of contact. And above all, when it comes to technology, we need to invest in applied technology. Because if we do not invest in applied technology, the effort is futile. Sometimes, as the professor mentioned earlier, that my neighbor, he might have a rainwater harvesting system, right? But it might not be applicable by neighboring country. It might not be applicable for my country. So that's one of the gaps that we've, not only in Belize but in the region, that it's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to some of these innovations. So applied technology is key in order to further our overall goal of efficient NDC implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I get your message. No big fancy technologies that are not appropriate for your country. That is a very sensitive answer indeed. And very happy also to have heard how you see this coming from your population and fitting with all the stakeholders in your country. I hear also demands for new technical needs assessment, and here maybe the NDC partnership can bring a hand and answer some of my questions rapidly. How do you see the gaps now that you have been working with so many countries? Where do you see also the potential? What can be improved for more technology development, also appropriate technology development, and technology development that is respecting also the rights of the people on site and is inclusive. Please.
Thank you. Again, very challenging question. I'd like to focus on one element that's for me, from my perspective, a gap that we have, not necessarily on the NDCs, but rather on the portfolio of support needs that we have collected from countries over these last 4 or 5 years of working with nearly 80 countries in this process of really identifying what the needs are and bringing the support to them. And that area is innovation at the local level. Most NDCs, I would say, include a component on innovation as part of those means of implementation and the key strategic actions that need to take place and be boosted in order to achieve the NDC targets. But what we have seen in terms of the prioritization and what countries bring to our table when they say, okay, NDC partnership, we would like to really make progress on this front, it's really a handful of countries that have requested support for this. So this is one of the things that I would like to flag from that, let's say, panorama and perspective that we have of the support needs from the countries. So innovation and how to link that to education policy in the country, how to engage not only implementing partners, but how to bring academic institutions into the NDC world, into the NDC discussion, research groups at the local level, how to enable these young students, creative people who are thinking of wonderful ideas that respond to the country needs, that are originated in the context, how to bring them and how to make them beneficiaries of that support that is being offered by the different partners. This, for me, is a critical issue, more so in light of the need to start articulating the NDCs in this year and in the upcoming NDC cycle with the 2050 net zero target that, according to science, will be necessary to keep on track. And of course, the decline in emissions and the adaptation that needs to happen from now. I think that the last IPCC report talks about starting a decline in emissions as soon as 2025. So this is really something pressing, and we would love to see much more coming on that front. Really, top of my head, I think that we had a request from Uruguay to start working on the integration of the innovation and science agenda into the NDC implementation roadmap, but it would be great to see so much more, and I think that there would be many partners that are keen on starting work on that front. That's on the side of the gaps. Some other things and ideas that I would like to offer, and maybe these are much more food for thought, is how can technology be used not only for the NDC implementation per se, but thinking of the construction of a new set of NDCs and to really for countries to be able to track what's going on with their NDC implementation process and progress at the country level. I think that technology will be necessary for these processes to be less costly and more efficient for countries. We are facing or starting to think of the implementation of the Enhanced Transparency Framework, for example, which for countries means taking a leap from a set of rules, procedures, guidelines, MRV from the past to much more robust, let's say, set of guidance on greenhouse gas emissions and removals monitoring, and also tracking what's going on with adaptation. And when you think about sectors such as land use change, and forestry, which is a large source of emissions and removals in developing countries, and the efforts that needs to be taken to collect data on how land use is in the country, how land cover is changing, and what's the associated carbon flux, this is something that really requires technology for you to be able to deliver and to collect the data on time, on point, and as accurately as possible. So these are, I'll say, really immediate needs in terms of technology. And technology is out there, but how to make it relevant, how to make it applicable to the context of the countries. So they're really powerful engines such as Google, how to adapt those things that are out there to the needs and to the context and to the capacities of the countries to absorb that technology. Same and final comment, implementation of Article 6. So this is a very powerful instrument indeed, but it also requires a large effort in terms of modern registry, blockchain, in order to ensure that the system works and that the Paris Agreement keeps its integrity. I do believe that technology has a crucial role to make sure that these really nice concepts and really good systems that are being thought and designed by the parties are aligned and respond to that larger target of the Paris Agreement, and that are really integral and lead to reduced emissions, enhanced adaptation. So those are my two final comments, and of course, happy to receive some questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you very, very much. I was happy to hear you talk about youth involvement. We have a representative of Yongo here, and definitely in terms of new technologies, they are great leaders and they have so much to bring. And new technologies that, if they can serve, and looking at how they can serve the needs of the populations, of course. Let me now open the floor to our audience. We have a few minutes, I would say 7 to 8 minutes for questions, and I would like then to be able to give the floor back to the CTCN Advisory Board Chair. But please, if you have, we have a microphone, I think, that could circulate. Yes, Andrea has the microphone, and I see here a question, and over there a question. So the young lady here, Honorine.
Thank you very much. You made a comment about youth's involvement in technologies to address the NDCs. But when we talk about youth involvement, and when, let's just say, a budget is being allocated, there's nothing like specific for youths to get involved in these technologies to address their NDCs. Whenever a budget is being allocated, it's just like a lump sum for everybody, and it's not always enough that something can be kept aside for youth. I mean, youths have amazing ideas. I can tell you that. I am working with youth, especially at grassroots level. They have amazing ideas and they cannot put it out there because some of them have no access to the internet and so on. Now, some of us who have the access and all that, we are trying to bring forth their voices and trying to showcase what they have and what they want you guys to do for them. But then when we bring up these ideas, we are always limited by resources. The resources are, in fact, when I notice how much the CTCN receives to actually carry out activities, I'm discouraged. I can't even tell them what's on my mind. They are developing a plan for work for the next 5 years, and I see the budget, and I'm like, what I have in mind for youth activities at grassroots level to address the technological needs, to address the NDCs, it requires resources, not just peanuts, real money. We want to see, if you really think you want to get youth involved in addressing their NDCs and especially using technologies, then you should also be ready to give the necessary resources to address that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorine. We'll give the mic also to the other person, Gina, for a second question, and then we can go.
Hi, thank you so much for the very diverse conversation and insights. I think it has been very interesting to see how there can be different synergies among different stakeholders for driving technology for more ambitious NDC. My question would be particularly for the NDC partnership. I think that, and coming from some comments from the colleague from the IPCC and also what my youth friend has said here, and is one of the issues with technology is when it comes to technology adoption mainly in communities or mainly in places where they are really needed. So and also with all the different like big technology projects happening, the big narratives happen. You mentioned, for instance, Article 6, etc. I am wondering how the NDC partnership is also guiding countries to have a human rights-based approach and to make also these technologies gender responsive so that they are not exacerbating maybe other inequalities. We have seen how the IPCC has talked about maladaptation, and I think that technology also can play a role there depending on what you implement. There can also have an effect somewhere else. So I think how I would be very keen to understand how this is also part of the work of the NDC partnership, because I feel that the guidance that the NDC partnership is doing is quite crucial, quite important, and yeah, would be very happy to know about that. Thanks.
Thank you. We have more questions? No. Oh yes, here. Please. And at the back, but that will be very...
Hi, I would like to add on what my friend from the Yongo said. I'm part of a youth international NGO called Care About Climate, and we have a NDC equity tracker where we analyze NDCs through indigenous, gender rights, and youth perspective. And to add to what Yongo said, I would like to know if you have plans or concrete example to include and empower vulnerable communities like women and youth through training and education program, and to give them access to more green jobs that will make these ambitious NDCs possible.
Thank you. As it is already 8 o'clock, I think we need to close the round of... I'm sorry to cut, but it's already 8 o'clock, and I think we'll have to leave the room. So I think a lot of questions came to you, Stephen. But
sure, I said that it was going to be food for thought, and it got the good effect. Okay, so thank you for those questions. I have to agree. It's been a challenge, and it's really not to NDC Partnership Support Unit to allocate funding to specific stakeholders on the ground. We do this through our focal points in the government. So the way that we work with the countries and with our focal points, who are mostly ministries of environment and ministries of planning in some countries, is to bring to them good practice guidance. So for instance, for youth, we have a youth engagement plan that is to the countries to see, to adopt, to see how they want to bring into their engagement with the NDC partnership, into the request for support that they place. And this is one of the ways that we offer, so countries start taking a broader and more comprehensive approach to involving not only line ministries, but also different representations, different institutions from different sectors in countries. So one very important thing to take into account is that NDC partnership is fully country-driven. So we are a matchmaking platform, and what we do is really to provide as many resources as possible for the countries to pick, choose, and apply to their context as they wish. But I do agree on that funding, targeting specifically the young and their initiatives and ways to support their creativity is in need, deeply needed globally. I think that this is a fair point, and I fully agree with your comment. And that, I think, links to the second question on how to ensure that the support provided takes into account human rights, also gender considerations. My answer goes along the same lines. We have a gender action plan for the NDC partnership countries to refer to when they are preparing their partnership plans, which is the instrument through which we communicate, let's say, the roadmap that they create to collaborate with partners of the NDC partnership. So what we want to do there is try to make sure, for instance, that every request for support has an indicator that is gender sensitive, gender responsive, that we have indicators that reflect youth, so how a project may be affecting positively, negatively, minority groups, all kinds of interest groups. So this best practice we try to implement with countries, and we do really our best to put these resources in front of them when we are creating, for example, a partnership plan or a request for support with them. And beyond that, there is also a resource that we have, which is our global knowledge platform, which is a repository of best practice from all our members. There's uncountable resources on good practice, case studies, summaries, analysis on things and very specific solutions that have been developed in many different places by our partners that can be used as a reference for countries when they are planning or implementing their projects. So this is also something that we always try to put in front of the eyes of the countries whenever they are planning and collaborating and engaging through the partnership. So this is how, as far as our role goes, but of course, these are very good points, and it would be really desirable to see that each and every project has a strong youth human rights component. That's something that we really take very seriously, and we are trying to enhance and improve over time with all countries that we have engagement with.
Thank you very much. I will give you the floor for just a few minutes, but we, just in the interest of everybody, I would like also to have the opportunity to give the floor to the director of the CTCN, Mrs. Rose Mwebaza, for closing remarks. So please just make a few, if that responds to the questions, of course, and I hope that the people in the room can bear with us a few minutes more.
Yes, it's just a request or a simple advice. Reach out to your focal points, not only the UNFCCC focal point, but also the focal point for the NDC partnership. It helps because for the most part, we try to maintain that level of communication as much as possible. And as an example, up until last year, I think the average age for our office back home was 25. So that just goes to show you that, you know, the push is there, the drive is there. You just have to, it works both ways. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. And dear panelists, I'm sorry I couldn't let you answer everything. Please stay here. I will just move and leave my place to Mrs. Rose Mwebaza, Director of the CTCN.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always humbling for me to sit in front of an audience like you on a day like this. It's humbling because I reflect on the work, having listened to our distinguished participants, and even I am amazed. One, what good leadership and collaborative work can do. Leadership, the co-chairs of the Technology Executive Committee and the advisory board of the CTCN, working together and providing the guidance that allows us to succeed as a mechanism and succeed well enough that within the convention itself, as we are all sitting here, is real consideration to replicate some of the good practice coming out of this, for example, for the Santiago network. But that really reflects to what years of consistent commitment and leadership that has been offered by the technology mechanism. And so for that, really, a lot of credit must go to the parties that support this, as well as the Secretariat. So to say thank you very much to our co-chairs, to the UNFCCC Secretariat, without whom we can't do this work. Director Villetti, we've worked with him for many years and his team to bring the work we do to the world. But also to the partnerships. When we talk about the network that CTCN has, I think the NDC partnership is a very good demonstration of how we work together to deliver, and working in multiple countries to do some of this work. Some of it individually, but some of it co-funded, as you heard in Belize. So it's really gratifying and showing the possibility of what really it means to do. And it was very nice to hear you, Lennox, refer to our colleagues, Ramiro and Maria. I always tell my colleagues it takes a village. These are the colleagues who support our work in the Latin American and Caribbean region, who always sit in the back or you never see. And so they are the people who make the success of what we do. So it's a bit late, but I just really do want to thank you. To emphasize the point that was made by both Kunzai and Lennox, that please do reach out to the NDCs, especially for our gender and youth and IPO constituency who have just joined. You've allowed us to do a lot of breakthrough work through our youth innovation labs and the gender just climate solutions. So if you could extend that to country level and bring our NDC work on board through the NDEs, who are, as you can see, really open, I think that would be absolutely wonderful. And I was very pleased also to hear both, I think, Stefania and Professor talk about innovation, because Prof were talking about innovation, supporting systems of innovation and the role of, for example, digital technologies. So these are some of the things that we know going together we must work on. And lastly, to you, Anne, who has in many ways, by your humble and generous contribution, significantly contributed to the evolution of our work on gender. Thank you for moderating. Thank you, everybody, and have a lovely evening. Thank you for staying behind so late.
Thanks.